For sake of time here, we'll have to skip a few things. We have a 15-hour seminar on this topic. According to the evolution theory, at some point, long ago and far away, life had to start from non-living matter. Ultimately, the evolutionist is stuck in a corner. He has to believe in spontaneous generation. It doesn't happen, folks. Life only comes from similar life forms. Nobody's ever observed anything other than that. Francisco Redi and Louis Pasteur disproved years ago the idea that life can come from non-living material. And yet here we are in the 21st century with people in secular universities still believing the impossible, that life came from non-living material. Now, if you've been duped into believing that, I'd challenge you to wake up and look at what you've been taught and say, hold it, this is not science. You've been indoctrinated into a worldview that is purely religious and I think flat ridiculous. The origin of life and the origin of major groups of animals remains unknown. Nobody has a clue how life got started. But the textbook says oceans formed as it rained on the rocks for millions of years. Millions of years of torrential rains created the oceans. And swirling in the waters of the oceans is a bubbling broth of complex chemicals. Progress from a complex chemical soup to a living organism is very slow. Well, I guess it is. It's totally stopped. That's how slow it is. It doesn't even happen. Never happens. This college textbook says the first self-replicating systems must have emerged in this organic soup. Now, if you want to believe your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa was soup, you're welcome to believe that, okay? But don't call that science. That's a religion. That's something you believe in, and just all I ask is that you admit, this is my religion. And then, obviously, my next question is going to be, okay, then why do all of us have to pay for your religion to be taught in the schools? They say we can't have religion in the schools. First place, that's not true. But if you don't want religion in the schools, then get evolution out, because evolution is purely a religious idea. Nobody's ever observed any of this. Miller and Urey wanted to know how the Earth and solar system had come to be, this textbook says. He never proved how life originated. What he did, he made up a fictitious atmosphere, Earth's primitive atmosphere. Now, this is pure baloney, okay? It didn't happen. I mean, this experiment did, but he didn't make life in the laboratory. Didn't even come close. This textbook, though, says many important events occurred during the Archean era, the most important of which was the evolution of life. Now, if you think you know how life got started, I would like to hear about it. I taught biology for 15 years. Nobody has a clue how life got started. This says, progress from complex molecules to the simplest living organism was a very long process. Yeah, why don't you hide it in long ago and far away? Maybe that'll make it sound more scientific. If they could do it long ago and far away, why can't we do it now? One student in a debate one time, he said, Mr. Hovind, what are you going to say if scientists make life in the laboratory? I said, well, first place, they are nowhere close. Secondly, if a bunch of scientists get together and produce life in the laboratory, that will prove that it takes intelligence to create life. Which is what I've been saying all along. This one says the first living cells emerged. They use that word emerged as if that is a scientific term. That is pure fairy tale stuff right there. Between 4 billion and 3.8 billion years ago. There is no record of the event. Well, that's not science. That's what you believe in. It must have emerged in this organic soup. Miller and Urey took some glass tubing and ran some gases through there. He studied chemical reactions of gases that existed in Earth's primitive atmosphere. Now, this is just baloney, folks. Earth did not have this primitive atmosphere. This is a typical experiment shown in the typical textbook to try to get you to believe that life can start from non-living material, and I'm telling you, it just can't happen. He didn't come close to making life. He excluded oxygen. He had what is called a reducing atmosphere, because he knew life could not evolve with oxygen present, because any amino acids that try to combine would be oxidized. Notice his gases down in the bottom right are methane, ammonia, water vapor, and hydrogen. No oxygen. Well, this creates a very serious problem. Ammonia is one of the gases he used. This textbook says several billion years ago, Earth's atmosphere had no free oxygen as it does today. Well, this is just a lie, okay? First place, Earth has always had oxygen. The oldest rocks have even more oxygen than we do today, up to 35% oxygen. And by the way, ozone is made from oxygen, and ozone blocks UV light. So if you don't have oxygen, you can't have ozone, and now UV light destroys your ammonia. And that was one of the gases you're counting on to get this to work. So you can't get life to evolve without oxygen, and you can't get life to evolve with oxygen. You really have a catch-22 situation here. Air bubbles indicate life. Air on the Earth used to have 50% more oxygen than it does now, about 30 to 35% oxygen. This textbook says Miller made a mixture that was rich in amino acids. Well, they're dreaming if they think that was rich in amino acids. This is pure propaganda. What he made was a big problem for the evolutionists because he filtered out the product, which would not be realistic for nature. It's not really going to get filtered out, okay? Secondly, he made 85% tar, 13% carboxylic acid, both of which are poisonous to life. Now, if you made an experiment and 98% was poisonous to the other 2%, you would not count that as a successful experiment. And the 2% that he did make of amino acids is mostly 2 amino acids, and there are 20 different amino acids that are required for life. Very, very complex. He didn't come close to making life in the laboratory. And these amino acids will bond very quickly with the tar and the acid. So he didn't make life. Amino acids are sort of like letters of the alphabet. What he made was some that were right-handed and some that were left-handed. This creates a serious problem because the simplest, smallest proteins have 70 to 100 amino acids, and they're all left-handed. DNA and RNA have all right-handed. He didn't come close to making life in the laboratory. He created a problem. And we've got tons of material on this. We can go, if you'd like, to more on this topic. So he did not make life in the laboratory. But the evolutionist is stuck with the idea life had to start somewhere from non-living material. And then the next step in the evolution theory would be that this early life form will somehow learn to reproduce itself. This creates a number of serious problems. First place, why would anything want to reproduce more of its own kind when that's only going to make more mouths to feed? Why not instead evolve the ability to live forever? Why hasn't any organism done that? Seems to me like that'd make a lot more sense, wouldn't it? Sure. There's a variety of dogs in the world, and they probably came from a common ancestor. A couple of dogs. That does not prove that all life forms came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago. Okay? We do see a lot of variations. There's a great book by Jonathan Wells, even though he's a Mooney. I disagree with him on religious grounds in many, many instances, but he has a great book on the scientific flaws of the evolution theory. Then they tell the kids that plants and animals somehow learn to produce different kinds, and that has never happened. The first living organism would have to learn to reproduce offspring that were different from itself. Or somewhere down the line this had to happen, long ago and far away. And then supposedly for billions of years these animals produced different kinds. See, evolution might be a philosophy, but it's not a science. It certainly might be a religion, but it's not a science. This textbook says bacteria slowly evolved to humans. That is just plain religious idea, folks. Nobody's ever seen any bacteria produce anything but a bacteria. Those trees of life are a lot of nonsense. Even Mary Leakey knows that, and she believes in evolution. Stephen Gould, the Marxist professor at Harvard, who believes in evolution, said the evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of the branches. The rest is inference, not the evidence of fossils. There's no fossil evidence that any animal ever produced a different kind of animal. But this textbook says all the many forms of life on Earth today are descended from a common ancestor. Well, you can believe that if you want, but that's not science. It said it's found in a population of primitive unicellular organisms. Well, I object, Your Honor. There's no such thing as a primitive unicellular organism. There are unicellular organisms, but they are not primitive. They are incredibly complex. Then the textbook says no traces of these events remain. And it's not science. It is something you believe in. It is not something we observe or test or demonstrate in the laboratory. It fails all of the tests of the scientific theory. This textbook implies that the humans, the mammals, and the birds have a common ancestor. Well, that is pure religious speculation inside that circle, folks. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. Darwin said, if my theory be true, that's a big if, by the way, numberless intermediate varieties must assuredly have existed. Boy, you're right about that, Charlie. There ought to be trillions of missing links. There are zero, none, zip, nada. Didn't happen. In the years after Darwin, this is David Ropp, who strongly believes in evolution. He said, his advocates hope to find predictable progressions. That's missing links. In general, these have not been found, yet the optimism has died hard and some pure fantasy has crept into textbooks. Well, duh. Talk about fantasy in the textbooks. Evolution is a fantasy. They tell the kids we have evidence from fossils. There is no fossil evidence for evolution. In the first place, if this were a court of law and you brought in a fossil and said, Your Honor, I believe this fossil is the ancestor of people or something else today. Any freshman law student with half a brain could say, objection, Your Honor, he can't prove this fossil had any kids. And he sure can't prove it had different kids. See, when you find a bone in the dirt, all you know is it died. That's all you know. You don't know that it had any kids, and you sure don't know it had different kids. And what would give you the authority to think a bone in the dirt can do something the animals today cannot do? Why would you think a bone in the dirt can do something, like produce something other than its own kind, when animals today only produce their own kind? Dogs produce dogs, cats produce cats, lions produce lions. Never an exception to that. Why is it somebody could believe that it did happen differently long ago and far away?